Dear students, I am Dr. Manish Singh. I am from Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, National Law University, Lucknow. I will be discussing a module on legal reasoning. This aims at the following learning outcomes. It aims to introduce you to the concept of legal reasoning and its importance. It helps you understand the basic components in legal reasoning. It makes you understand the role of logical reasoning in law. And it also helps you to know about the various types of legal reasoning methods in terms of kinds of arguments. Legal reasoning as a concept is a process of thinking which helps a researcher to come to decision relating to law. Law is a tool of social control that attempts to resolve conflicts in the society, to direct current activity while maintaining continuity with the past, and to control the future by laying down procedures, approaches and theories. Every decision must be guided and followed by a logical reasoning which takes into account the past decisions and statutes, the present position of the parties to the cases, and its own impact on future activity. There are four basic components in legal reasoning which applies to legal process. They are logic, justice, experience and policy. Logic refers to the internal consistency and equal application of the law. It refers to more than formal logic. Formal logic is the science of deriving a conclusion from stated premises. It is not directly concerned with either true or false. A person can obtain a false but logically correct conclusion from a false premise. Therefore, logic prefers to make correct application of precedents and equal application of law. Justice is to do right between the parties. Philosophical thought justice is an ingredient though it is based on evidence. Experience is an important component in legal reasoning. The life of the law has not been logic, it has been experience. Experience gives power to give good legal judgments. The last component is the policy. The term policy may be used to describe the process of approaching a problem. Policy is used to mean a scientific attempt to peer into the future and foresee the consequences of a decision. The use of this approach requires the individual to put aside the current interest of the parties and to keep in mind how this decision would affect other persons in future. Now we will discuss the types of logical reasoning and their principles. Among the above four components, that is logic, justice, experience and policy, logical thinking is the core concept of legal reasoning, as scientific generalizations are based on logical explanations. Every science is based on the principles of logic or reason. Science involves the rule of reasoning or use of arguments. Arguments are made on the basis of connection, relationship, association, property, common variable or attribute between things and activities mentioned in the argument. Arguments can be categorized as deductive, inductive, inverse deductive, analogy and a fortiori. Dealing them one at a time, first we will discuss the deductive method. The method of studying a phenomena by taking some assumptions and deducting conclusions from these assumptions is known as the deductive method. Deduction is a process of reasoning from the general to particular or from the universe to individual, from given premises to necessary conclusions. Deduction is also known as analytical, abstract and a priori method. It has an abstract approach to the study of science. Deductive method is a part of the scientific method. It is basically a rational approach in accordance with the tenets of deductive logic. Deductive logic uses a general statement as the basis of argument. Core of the common forms of deductive logic is syllogism, which runs like this: plants grow in daytime, a cactus is a plant, therefore cactus plant grow in daytime. The third statement follows from the first and second statements taken together. A syllogism consists of a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. A major premise usually states a general rule. In legal arguments, this is generally a statement of law. A minor premise makes a factual assertion about a particular person or thing or a group of persons or things. In legal arguments, this is usually a statement of fact. A conclusion connects the particular statement in the minor premise with the general one in the major premise and tells us how the general rule applies to the facts at hand. In legal arguments, this process is called applying the law to the facts. Taken for example, to qualify as a victim of rape under criminal law, there must be sexual intercourse with a woman. The intercourse must be without her will. This is the major premise which states a rule of law. Here the woman had consensual sex. This is the minor premise which makes a statement of fact. Therefore, the plaintiff cannot be a victim of rape under criminal law. This is the conclusion which correctly applies the law to the facts. In order for a syllogism to be valid, it must be logically impossible for its premises to be true and its conclusion to be false. In other words, a syllogism is valid if, given the truth of a premises, the conclusion follows logically such that it too must be true. An argument is not valid simply because its premises and conclusion are all true. Take this as an example. All teachers are human. Some human are excellent racers. Therefore, some teachers are excellent racers. If read apart, each of these statements is true. Teachers are indeed human. Some human, for example athletes, are excellent racers. And as it happens, some teachers are also good racers. But this argument is not valid. The fact that teachers are humans and that some humans are excellent racers does not prove anything about the racing ability of teachers. Based on the information we are given in the premises, it is logically possible that no teacher of the world has ever stepped foot in field for running. Because it is logically possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false, this argument is not logically valid. The example given above is a fallacious argument. When researchers propose a study of the causal factors of the delinquencies which are on the increase and which seems injurious to them, they have some general anticipatory idea as to what to be observed and what specific facts in the main would be relevant to their inquiry, even though they may not have realized these implications. Then, on the basis of their observation, they formulate certain single propositions as to the causal factors of delinquency. That is, they deduce from the complexities of observed behavior certain single idea. In other words, they use a process of reasoning about the whole observed situations in order to arrive at a particular idea. This process of reasoning is called deduction or deductive reasoning. The following example can be cited for the deductive reasoning. Cesare Lombroso, an Italian criminologist and founder of the Italian school of positivist criminology, observed peculiar physical features among the criminals and by using the logical deductive thinking formulated the following propositions by taking his observations into consideration. Criminals are by birth a distinct type of persons. They can be recognized by stigma or anomalies such as asymmetrical cranium, long lower jaw, flattened nose, scanty beard, and low sensitivity to pains. These physical anomalies identify the personality which is predisposed to criminal behavior. And lastly, such persons cannot refrain from committing crime unless the circumstances of life are generally favored. Deduction is logical reasoning, and if we start with good premises, deduction can serve scientific research in three ways. Number one, deduction helps in detecting the questionable assumptions logically involved in what is believed to be the truth, and it implies the number of available hypotheses for formulating the possible alternatives. Secondly, the logical deduction of its consequences make clear the meaning of any hypothesis. Thirdly, the process of rigorous deduction is an aid in the attempt to steer clear of irrelevancies, and thus the right principle is found. There are certain steps to be followed in the deductive method. Step 1, the exploration of the problem. An indispensable preliminary to any investigation is the existence of a definite problem in the mind of the researcher. The problem must be one of significance for the actual world. Step 2 is about setting up the hypothesis from assumptions. Here, the researcher has to select the assumptions from which the conclusion will be derived. The assumption must be derived from observation. They must be close to reality. On the basis of suitable assumptions, hypothesis may be formulated. A hypothesis is a conjecture, a hunch of the possible connection between two phenomena. Step 3 is about theoretical development of the hypothesis. The nature and implication of the hypothesis have to be carefully analyzed to formulate a theory. This is purely the deductive part of the process. By logical reasoning, we have to deduce the consequences. Deductive explanation consists of two parts, the explanandum and explanans. The explanandum is the event, problem or thing to be explained and is the conclusion of a deductive argument. It may be an individual event. The explanans is the premise and explain the explanandum, that is the conclusion. The explanandum is deduced from the explanans. The deductive explanation has a valid argument because it takes the form of conditional argument, affirming the antecedent, which is a valid form of inference. Step 4 is about verification of the theories. Now we shall discuss the merits and demerits of deductive method. The merits of deductive method are that it is very powerful because it makes use of a valid form of deductive argument where the explanandum must be true if the explanans are true. Further, this method is a very simple method. From a few basic facts of human nature, a number of inferences can be drawn by logical reasoning. It is a substitute for experimentation. It is not possible for the investigator to conduct controlled experiments with the legal phenomena in a laboratory. He can therefore fall back upon deductive reasoning. Another merit of deductive method is it is actual and exact, because the deductive method tends for the generalizations which are accurate and exact. The demerits of deductive reasoning is that it requires high degree of logic and reasoning. Not everyone can use deductive method successfully, and even many experienced researchers have been trapped by faulty reasoning. Another demerit is that if the researcher confines only to abstraction, his model may have the elegance and be logically beautiful, but it may be far away from real life. Thus, there is a danger of building inapplicable models. The theories arrived at by deductive reasoning are valid only under assumed conditions. The assumptions must be valid if the theories are to hold good. Lastly, deductive method can be applicable to the limited studies only. The second method of logical reasoning is the inductive method. Induction is the most often used method of scientific research. Induction is a process of reasoning from particular cases to whole group of cases, from specific instances to general rules. The inductive method is also known as historical or empirical or a posteriori method. It may be described as practical approach to the research problems. It tries to remove the gulf between theory and practice. This method examines various causes one after another and tries to establish causal relations between them. General principles are laid down after examining a large number of special instances or facts. The method is said to be empirical because the formulation of principle is made only after an extensive compilation of the raw data of experience. The data may be historical or statistical data. The historical instances are qualitative while the statistical data are quantitative. Generalizations are made after the analysis of data. Inductive reasoning starts from observable facts from which a generalization is inferred. Let us take an example. Man A died, man B died, and so on. Thus, all men are mortal. One comes across the death of so many individuals. On the basis of these observed facts, one may infer that all human beings are mortal based on inductive reasoning. To give an example for inductive reasoning, we can cite the work of Dr. Goring. He conducted a research on Lombrosian concept that the criminals constitute a distinct physical type. He made comparison of several thousand criminals and non-criminals and finds in his investigation that there is no relation between the criminal behavior and physical anomalies which are proposed by Lombroso. Induction operates on faith that in the basic course of things, if for a long time regularity is evidenced, then it is a surety enough for the inference that it will continue in the future. If the premise and conclusion in the logical case are both known, some probability relations may be established between them, and this may serve as a paradigm of an inductive inference. Inductive explanations also have explanandum and explanans. The explanandum is generally probable. Explanandum cannot be deducted from the explanans with certainty. The explanandum is implied by the explanans. The explanans support or provide evidence for the explanandum but does not make the latter certain. The explanans can be true and the explanandum can still be false in the inductive explanation. Inductive explanations explain either the probability of individual events or statistical generalizations. Inductive process examines the particular phenomena and discovers from them the general law. There are two laws which bind the process of induction. That is the law of universal causation and the law of uniformity of nature. Perfect induction is the method of arriving at a universal proposition and after taking into consideration all the individual instances of phenomena under investigation. Inductive argument derives a generalized conclusion on the basis of particulars which are often empirically derived observations. The premise of an inductive argument makes the conclusion probable, not certain. The inductive approach relies on the scientific discovery of facts. One characteristic of inductive argument is that it establishes a conclusion with the content which goes beyond its premise. From the observation of a sample, an inference is made about a whole population. This is called the inductive leap, jumping from the premise which relates to an observed sample to the conclusion which concerns itself with the entire population. The greater the number or representative units in the premise or observed in the sample, the smaller is the inductive leap. The premise of an inductive argument does not establish the conclusion conclusively. The premise of a valid argument may be true but the conclusion may still be false. Its premise only supports the conclusion, but it does not make the latter certain. There are also certain merits and demerits of inductive method. The merits of inductive method are that it is more realistic, because it studies the changes in conditions surrounding the social activities of man, and their effect on social activities are analyzed and displayed. Also, there is a possibility of verification. The method is more useful because its propositions can be tested and verified easily. This method takes full note of the complex relationship found in actual life and examines them carefully. Another merit of inductive reasoning is that it is dynamic. This method takes into consideration the changeable nature of assumptions in its analysis. It does not consider facts to be stable, therefore it is a dynamic method. The demerits are, it is a very difficult method. This method cannot be used by a beginner or a common man because it is impossible for an ordinary person to collect facts, study them and derive some conclusion out of them. The cost is too much for him. The propositions obtained through this method are based upon data collected by investigators. Therefore, there is a danger of investigators' bias entering into propositions. There is very limited scope of verification. Since the propositions obtained through this method are based on a few facts, the universal applicability of these propositions is always in doubt. This method is commonly used for lifeless objects of the physical science. In socio-legal studies, we study a man's problems. As such, the method has a very limited use. If anyone asks which method is preferred, the answer is both. Professor Marshall says, induction and deduction are both needed for scientific study as right and left foot for walking. Larabi remarks, if extreme rationalist, that is deductionist, is like a spider spinning out theories from within the extreme, empiricist, that is the inductionist, is to be compared to an ant which piles useless heaps of facts. Better than either the spider or an ant is the bee, which selectively gathers pollen and transforms it into honey. To be a bee, one has to mingle both induction and deduction in intricate way. The third method of logical reasoning is the inverse deductive method. J.S. Mill is the chief advocate of the inverse deductive method. It is a combination of inductive generalizations obtained by means of the comparative method or by statistical method with deduction from more ultimate laws. It is a way to arrive at reality through experiment, observation and conclusion. This method starts with the use of deduction and then uses the method of induction to find out the reason of the phenomena which is under study. The fourth argument is in the form of analogy. Analogy is a process of reasoning between parallel cases. In this method, conclusions are arrived at by reasoning of resemblance, wherefrom partial resemblance or agreement of two things or issues to each other. J.S. Mill says that two things resemble each other in one or more respects. A certain proposition is true of the one, therefore it is true of the other. Case law involves reasoning by analogy. In practice, the judiciary proceeds on the basis of a number of options of resemblance of relations or attributes between cases by applying the old rule to the new case. A fortiori is another method of reasoning. This phrase is used in logic to denote an argument to the effect that because one ascertained fact exists, therefore another which is included in it or analogous to it and is less improbable, unusual or surprising must also exist. A fortiori in Latin means with even stronger reasons and applies to a situation in which if one thing is true, then it can be inferred that a second thing is even more certainly true. For example, if something is prohibited, then it is assumed that anything more obvious is prohibited. Now let us recapitulate what we have learned so far in this module. In logic, there are two distinct methods of reasoning, namely the deductive and the inductive approach. Deductive reasoning works from the general to the specific. This is also called a top-down approach. The deductive reasoning works as follows. Think of a theory about topic and then narrow it down to specific hypothesis. Hypothesis that we can test or can be tested. Narrow down further if we would like to collect observations from hypothesis. In a conclusion, when we will use deduction, we reason from general principles to specific cases, as in applying a mathematical theorem to a particular problem or in citing a law of physics to predict the outcome of an experiment. And inductive reasoning works the other way around. It works from observation or observations towards generalization and theories. This is also called a bottom-up approach. Inductive reason starts from specific observations, look for patterns or no patterns, regularities or irregularities, formulate hypotheses that one could work with, and finally ended up developing general theories or drawing conclusion. In a conclusion, when one uses induction, he observes a number of specific instances and from them infer a general principle of law. These two methods are very different in nature when used in conducting researches other than being top-down and bottom-up. Inductive reasoning is open-ended and exploratory, especially at the beginning. On the other hand, deductive reasoning is narrow in nature and is concerned with testing or confirming hypotheses. Comparing the two reasoning, we first recollect the properties of deduction. In a valid deductive argument, all of the content of the conclusion is present, at least implicitly in the premises. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Valid deduction is necessarily truth preserving. If new premises are added to a valid deductive argument, the argument remains valid. Deduction is erosion proof. Deductive validity is an all or nothing matter. The conclusion of an inductive argument has content that goes beyond the content of its premises. A correct inductive argument may have true premises and a false conclusion. Induction is not necessarily truth preserving. New premises may completely undermine a strong inductive argument. Induction is not erosion proof. Inductive arguments come in different degrees of strength. In some inductions, the premises support the conclusions more strongly than in others. But some philosophers have doubt that induction is really a method of logical reasoning, since observations of past instances may never be sufficient to give us certainty about what will happen in future. For example, observing billions of white swans does not imply that all swans are white. Thank you.